Those who have been in a coma, what was it like? I was in medically induced coma for about a week. The coma itself is not much to talk about, there is just a gap in your memory, even from before it happened. I don't even remember the accident that brought me there. Waking up from it is much different story though. Since I was fully dosed by painkillers and sedatives, and since the trauma I suffered was very serious, my brain constructed very stressful, vivid nightmares I remember to this day. Do you think your brain was trying to wake you up? I'm not really sure. It was more like the shallow sleep just before you wake, when you're semi-aware of your surroundings but you're also half dreaming. The former made me realize I'm in the hospital and that something bad happened, could not figure out what though. The latter combined with the said meds made the experience utterly terrifying. But yes, at some moment I realized that I need to wake up, but I didn't know how. Also, there were several timelines concurrently going on in my head, as crazy as it may sound, and I could not determine which one is the correct one to wake into. None of them was the correct one, although the fragments of reality were present in each of them, and I didn't have a conscious or any other control over choosing between them. It's not like I chose my reality, it's more like those delusional ones receded eventually. It's called ICU delirium. Some people feel things are being done to them, like being buried alive or having legs and arms amputated. I had ICU delirium, and had the most intense and horrifying delusions. I didn't know a mind could go to such dark places, but mine did, and it scared me half to death. It has taken months to get some of what I thought I was experiencing out of my head. Can I ask what they were about? You may not answer if you don't like talking about it, too. Well, here are a couple of the less violent ones. One involved me having killed the mothers of two of my best friends. One male, one female. My female friend wasn't as upset as my male friend. In my delirium, he told everyone, and at different times during the day, people would come into my hospital room and beat me with bags of sharp rocks. This happened a few times until my friend got a hold of me and he beat me until I was nothing more than blood and flesh on the floor. Even though I was sort of out of my body watching it happen, I was simultaneously in the moment being hit by the rocks. Days after coming home, I had to be reassured I had not killed the mom of either friend. Another time I had visitors and my niece was holding my hand and massaging it, and I remember having a delusion that she was breaking all the bones in my hand. I could have sworn on a Bible at that time that it happened. So bizarre. There's so much worse that I can't and won't discuss because I am so ashamed that my mind even went to such dark places. I think I have PTSD from it all. It all seemed so real. Ugh. I never want to go through that again. I was in a coma for almost a month, 29 days. The dreams were terrible, and I had a problem where if I smelled something that I could relate to pure oxygen, or the room I was staying in, it would trigger a flashback. I would literally be reliving it all over again. Bleach was almost guaranteed to trigger it. It gets better. And if you have flashbacks, tell your doctor. They put me on something that stopped them. A year later I stopped taking the meds to see if I was better, and yes, my brain rewired. Bottom line is, I know what you are going through. You are torn with the knowledge it wasn't real, but it is remembered as clearly as any other real-life memory. I was in a very short coma, 6 days, after a brain hemorrhage. I recall nothing during the coma. I have a fuzzy understanding of my first week or two after waking up, having pieced it together by the stories I was told. And memories of the days leading up to it were temporarily wiped out, though they have since returned. This was over a decade ago. My memory in general is imperfect at best. Edit, I should mention that my coma was induced so they could stabilize me and drain the blood via my skull. My mum had the same thing. Unfortunately hers was so severe and she died after 5 days into her coma. I'm kind of glad that you don't remember your coma, because I like to think her last moments were having fun with her family, not being scared knowing she was gonna die. Your mom's last moments memories on Earth were exactly what you're hoping they are. I can tell you with time spent as an ICU nurse. If she had a hemorrhage, that's the very last thing she remembered before it. We try so hard to keep them with us here. That's what those 5 days were. But her last moments were really spent with you, being happy and excited for you. I wish I could look you in the eyes and reassure you. My wife was in a coma for about a month. At first I didn't bring the kids up to her, because of how she looked. But in the 3rd week her color was closer to normal, and there was less medical stuff going on as she was pretty stable compared to the first 2 weeks. Anywho, I had told the kids that while mom wasn't responsive there was a chance could she hear us, so they should be as brave as they can and sound as happy as they can. I described to them everything I thought that might spook them, from the tubes and wires to things beeping randomly and doctors and nurses coming and going. They were awesome. Even in the initial shock at seeing her with a ventilator they were loving, hugged and patted, held her hand etc. We sat in the room a while and just talked. At one point I asked the kids what their favorite vacation was. Instead of our Disney and Universal Studios trips they both agreed it was the road trip we took from Vegas down to Arizona, driving all over and seeing all the incredible sights. We talked about rides and amusements in Vegas, then Hoover Dam, the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, cave dwellings, petrified forest, silly road stops, a cheap motel we stayed in Flagstaff. We laughed and cried, just a little. It was as nice as it could be. They kissed her goodbye saying see you soon. My wife heard it all, but in a hallucinatory way. She now has, to this day, near 10 years later, a vivid memory of a second Arizona vacation she went on with us. She even asked me early on after she woke up if we had gone on a vacation recently. Her mind went through every detail we talked about and even added on to it as if it all actually happened, and the memories of it are as real as any. I was in a coma for almost 3 months and lost all memory from a few hours before the coma until waking up in a different hospital. I had a few vague dreams of people standing very close and saying me how I would be okay. I later met my chief surgeon. He did several operations while I was in coma, and nurses, and while I didn't recognize any of them, their voices were very strongly familiar. Good on you priming kids that a patient in a coma may be able to hear even if they cannot react. I was kicked in the face by a donkey as a kid and lost all memories from that morning until 3 days later when I woke up. The time skip was freaky, but what was even weirder for me was that I went to see a movie next weekend and felt like I had seen it before. Turns out my brother had seen this movie while I was out, and he and my dad discussed it while sitting with me. Spoiled Spider-Man 2 for me. I was 10 days in coma. I don't remember anything about. Not sure if it is a blessing or a curse. We were hit by a drunk driver. My wife and I survived, our daughter didn't. To me that stuff on TV where the patient wakes up and everything goes back to normal is bullshit. When I woke up I was in a conversation with another patient. Air Force at sick bays, not individual rooms. I can only compare it to a computer. I had been hung in an update and then, flicker, new screen. I had woken up several days earlier, but nothing stayed with me. My wife says I was paranoid that they were putting acid in my IV. Because I was tripping. I was hostile and aggressive. I read the medical records. They kept me restrained for a couple of days after I hit a nurse. I started acting normal, so they moved me from ICU to the sick bay. The blessing is for getting 10 days of some pretty intense pain. I was broken in a lot of places and bruised in all the rest. Never knew you could bruise some of them. That freaked me out. The curse was I wasn't there when my wife needed me most. There is that tinge of guilt that she faced that grief alone for 10 days. I know, couldn't be helped, not my fault. I had meningitis when I was 12, which got misdiagnosed for stomach flu and ended up with me being taken to the hospital last minute. The last memory I had was falling asleep watching the emergency news on the Brussels airport attack. I, later on, had a sort of fever dream, which ended up to be true, about my parents driving me to the ER saying it's okay over and over again. I couldn't move or talk, so it seemed more like a dream than something that was happening. I saw the lights of the ER parking lot which made me close my eyes, and after that, it was like taking a nap. I had no awareness of time at all. It's like going to sleep and just waking up what feels like a second later, but it's morning already. I woke up 6 days later, highly drugged, but only gained consciousness the day after. My first memory after waking up is opening my laptop in the hospital bed to play Minecraft. I have no idea what happened or what I said when I woke up before that. I had a motorcycle wreck a few years ago. Not sure if coma is the correct term, but I was unconscious for 2 days, honestly just felt like the worst, least refreshing nap in the history of naps. Had the wreck on a Sunday, woke up sometime Tuesday afternoon/evening, and asked if the motorcycle was okay. It wasn't. Not me, but my dad has described his coma after his car accident. He was pulled up a little too far at a stop sign, and a guy who was speeding and he talked on his phone crashed into it. So he was in a coma for about 2 months. On my end, it wasn't like the movies. He didn't wake up suddenly. It was 2 months of steady improvement. One eye opened, then a few days later his other eye was half open, then he could wiggle a toe, then he could move his fingers, etc. On his end, he said he could hear bits and pieces of what was happening around him, but it was like a dream that he couldn't wake up from. When I and my 2 younger siblings would come in and talk to him, his heart rate would go down. When a football game was on and his friends came to sit with him and watch it, the nurses made them turn it off once his team started losing because his heart rate blew up. Edit, he's a fan of the Miami Dolphins, so I guess his brain never fully returned to normal. I was in a coma for 3 days fueling a serious cycling accident, medically induced. I woke up with zero recollection of why I was there or what was said while I was out. It is easily the scariest situation I've found myself in, but I can't say I remember it. I woke up to my mom and dad in the hospital with me and my body in traction of some sort, and that was way scarier to me. My wife was in a diabetic coma for 2 weeks when she was in elementary school. She knew her sugar was low, then all of a sudden she woke up in the hospital with absolutely no idea that any time had passed. I wasn't in one for long, just under a week. While I was in the coma, I didn't remember a thing. When I came out of it, I just remember hearing my mom yell to the attending, "He's up." Then I woke up with a bunch of white coats in the room. I was super stiff and incredibly confused. Oddly enough, I kept having vivid dreams of myself in the coma after the fact. Still have them to this day. They're almost like an out-of-body experience because I can see myself laying in the bed with people around me. I was hit by a car when I was 5 years old. I ended up with toxic shock syndrome and went into a coma for 4 months. I just remember some very weird dreams, which I can still recall vividly 26 years later. Someone mentioned something about visiting another realm, and that's pretty close to the mark. What happened in these dreams? My favorite dream from the coma involved me floating over a huge gray-colored ocean, and I saw something rise up from the water that I can only describe as a dragon with scoliosis. It moved its head like it was smelling the air and then turned and looked right at me. In another one, my favorite cousin had abandoned me, and now lived in the ceiling above my hospital bed with my 2 best friends, Jason and Jason, who were also twins. They just moved a tile out of the ceiling and would just stare at me from above. In 2016 I was in a coma from March 31st to May 5th, then half awake for another month after that. It was like the longest, scariest dream of my life. I was medically induced by a fentanyl drip for about a week at first, and let me tell you, fentanyl is a demon. Wacky dreams about fighting corrupt hospital officials, so my brain knew where I was. They didn't think I'd ever talk or walk again, but in the hospital bed, I laughed at an episode of that 70s show and inclined every day after. Putting me at about 85% health overall these days. But pretty much an average guy. Oh, it was a head injury, had a seizure in the bathroom that made me fall onto the sink. I can only compare it to when you're little and wake up at a friend's house and don't know where you are. I was in a coma for 2 months after a bad car accident. It wasn't medically induced, it was thanks to brain damage. When I woke up, I was alone in the hospital room and had no clue what happened or why I was there. I had a neck brace on due to a broken neck, so I figured something was wrong with my neck but was unsure how or what happened. For some reason, I thought I was 60 years old. I was in my 20s. I was paranoid and scared but didn't know why I was there. I used context clues to figure out I was in the hospital. It was frightening. After about 5 minutes I decided to go back to sleep. 2 months of sleep wasn't quite long enough. When I was in 5th grade I fell out of a tree, and bonked my head pretty well. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. For me, the experience is easily summarized in 3 parts. 1. When I fell, I blacked out before I hit the ground. Or at least that is where memory fades out. It was as if my consciousness was drained away and then blackness and nothingness. It was as if my body knew how badly it was going to hurt and so it shut down. 2. I have very, very vague memories while in the coma of hearing my dad reading a book, or my mom telling me that she knew I would pull through. But these were always super fuzzy moments and I never was conscious during them. It was more like a half second of being aware of one particular thing, the way the tube felt being taped against my arm and wishing I could reach out and move it, and then back into the nothingness. I think that I was somewhat aware of the fact that I was a little more aware each time that this happened, but honestly I am not certain of even that much. 3. Waking up was sudden. So sudden. I was in blackness. Had a moment of awareness, like my neck hurts, and then the pain was magnitudes higher. No longer a distant perception but something that I was actively conscious of. Waking up was the most painful moment of my life, and I just started crying and then couldn't even cry, it hurt so bad. I think that had more to do with injuries sustained to my neck and head than the coma, but that is what it was like. After an hour my body was used to the pain and I was totally normal, albeit very weak, hungry, and thirsty. I survived and am fine now without any lasting issues. Were any of you or anyone you know in a coma? Leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more same videos.